I was wandering around LinkedIn the other day, and I saw somebody's show photo and noticed a cable line that was running down the middle of a room, which is necessary sometimes, right? But looking at this photograph and the position of the equipment and everything and how the tables were signed up, this was the straightest line I had ever seen. I swear they got out a laser to line up this tape line to make sure that everything was exactly in place. It was absolutely precise. I wept. I wept for joy. What does finished look like for you? These people put some thought into it. I want to talk about that philosophy today. Welcome back.
Welcome to your weekly dose of uncommon sense, helpful insights, and tough love. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. The Intentional Success Podcast comes to you through the generous support of Mertz Crew.
Mertz Crew helps top AV companies book quality AV freelancers. Your choice, your rates. We handle contracts, insurance, and payments. You save time, cost, and reduce risk. Start today at mertzcrew.com.
Now on to the show.
So in today's Intentional Success Podcast, I want to ponder a little bit the notion of what we look like when we think we're done. What's the quality of the proposal that we're sending out? What are we going for? How does our ballroom look? How does that show prep look? What's the paperwork we give to our technicians? What does the invoice look like for the customer? What about the processes inside your company? What's your org chart look like? Okay. These things all have a personality. Work with me here. They all have a personality. That personality is reflected from you and your organization. And it matters because there's always somebody who will notice. There's always somebody like me who's going to notice how you take down cable. Every time I walk in, I don't know what it is. Every time I walk into a ballroom, the first thing I do is I look at the floor. Okay, one, because I don't want to trip over something because some of you guys are numbskulls. But two, I may be walking into a setup. Who knows what I could trip over? I always look at the floor. And from the very first class I taught, the first time I taught in my staffing company way back in the 80s, I was training AV technicians to support all the AV companies in the hotels around town. And the most important, the thing I spent the most time on was not how to properly set up a projector or focus a light. It was how to tape down cable. And I was all about, and still am, about right angles. Cable should always run either parallel or at a right angle to a wall because that helps people who are walking identify this as an obstacle that they need to step over, no matter how many bright, shiny tape colors you put on it, how many lights you shine on it. The fact of the matter is, if it's at an angle, it's harder for us to see and comprehend and check our steps. You can trip over a 1/8 inch thick cable. Trust me, I've done it. So that sort of thing really speaks to me. But we see this in other things as well. If I'm reviewing somebody's proposal, I'm following an order through their system to see what their processes are like. So I've started asking questions to help understand the philosophy. For instance, if you're trying to improve your processes, are you trying to make them better? Or are you trying to make sure that they have the right level of complication? Is it possible to improve processes and not make them more complicated? Can you make something better by making it less complicated? Trust me, I've seen some really complicated processes. What we call the Department of Redundancy department, where there's 3 softwares that are all doing the same thing at different parts of the job, 3 different sets of criteria. The information might be really good, but it's extremely complicated. Okay. Is the proposal you're providing your customer interesting, or is it complete? What's interesting about complete? If it's not thought-provoking, what was the purpose of it? Okay. If the only purpose is to give precise information, are we missing an opportunity? I'm not saying that there's a right or a wrong. I'm saying in a given moment, in a given situation, one might be better than the other. One might touch that other person in a way that will help you more than another will. When you are putting together a package, well, think about building an order. Is there any line item in your rental management or estimating system that you're using where if you put in line item A, you always have to include line item B? That it's written in stone. These two things do not work without each other. You always have to put both in. If you leave one out, you're always going to be wrong. Well, come on. All of you have something like that. Isn't that a kit? Can't we fix that? Okay. Who are we protecting that level of complicated detail for? Whose whoopee is that? Okay. When the rest of the world just needs to know, I need to put in a line item and it includes everything that line item needs. Okay. So who are we trying to make happy? And if we're not thinking about the other person and we're thinking about our needs or our department, we're missing some great opportunities to do some really awesome work. Do you allow things to happen, or do you check to make things don't happen? Think about that. When you work, when something's going through your system, do you have a systems of checks and balances to find mistakes, or do you have a system that allows non-mistakes to continue to flow through? Those are two different philosophies, right? Sure, we want to find and stop and prevent mistakes, but do we know what a mistake is? Okay. And have we taken away the opportunity to invoke that mistake, or are we treating everything as a potential mistake and checking it along the way? Right? Again, different ways of thinking. Okay. Is your solution simple or is it simplistic? I walked through a backstage recently, and it was a pretty major show, and everything out front looked pretty awesome, but backstage it was simplistic. Okay, the level of detail wasn't backstage that we had out front. You know, the level of precision fell apart behind the curtain, where, in my opinion, we need it more, because when it's dark, we're going to trip over stuff. Or two, the magic is behind the curtain. And if the customer walks behind the curtain and finds out that the wizard's back there frantically pulling at knobs and yanking on things, which is what this backstage looked like, the magic goes away and the Wizard of Oz is no longer really a wizard, right? Do we need to be precise, or do we need to be exact? Okay. The precision of the straight cable line is not the same as the exactitude of a straight cable line. Precision can be perceived. Okay. Exactness has to be measured. Now, you can argue that semantics either direction, but if I perceive precision, it is precise. If I only care about exactitude, I need to be in an industry or in a role where exactitude is what matters. Okay. Precision isn't good enough. It has to be perfect. Right? God help us if we ever have to be perfect at our jobs. We're all going to fail. I mean, imagine no one will sleep anymore, and we'll never get it correct, will we? Now, look at the things that your outputs. Look around you. Look at the jobs you're doing, the proposals you're putting together, your website, your marketing, the feeling that you get when you walk into the front door of your building. Have you established a look? Okay. Is your look intentional? And does that look have a soul? Do we see the soul of your business? And if you don't understand the difference between those two things, guess what? You probably just have a look. But companies that have a soul and find ways to manifest that, whether it's in the lobby of their building or how they prepare the equipment for show site, how they treat their execution team, the freelance crew, the staff that go out and do shows, okay, the interactions they have with their customer. Do these things have a soul, or do they just look like they're supposed to be good? And there's a difference, okay? Are you taking the steps? Are you considering these things? Or are you just going through the motions? Because this is how good you're going to be. Now, Tom, how did you get off on this tangent here today? I'll tell you what. Many of you know I took up pottery a couple years ago. It was sort of that post-pandemic, I need to find something to do, or more importantly, my wife needed to find something for me to do. So she signed me up for pottery classes, and I haven't done anything really creative since college. And guess what? It was a blast. It's a time to go hang out with some other people, adults, young adults, and work with my hands and be able to do stuff where there is no right answer. Okay. Make a toad house. Tom, make a toad house. Make a house that the toad in your garden can go live in. What's that going to look like? Well, that was Tom's toad house. What's your toad house look like? There is no right answer here. Okay. It's something with an opening that's big enough for a toad. Come on. Everything else is creativity. What I love about pottery and hand building and throwing on the wheel is that I can use as much or as little precision as is appropriate for the design. And I can get better. And I will continue to get better. And it's not that different from my 2 decades journey through martial arts, is that I'm never going to finish learning martial arts. I am never going to finish learning pottery. You are never going to finish learning how to put on shows. Okay? You're never going to have the last best proposal you're ever going to write. You're never going to finish improving the soul of your business as it's perceived by others. We have to constantly work on these things. Now, that may mean working on you. That may mean that you've got to get out of that space that keeps you from pursuing creative solutions, where you're more interested in being complete than simply being interesting, where you're more focused on fulfilling all the needs through complicated rather than just figuring out how to make it better, where you're more interested in being flexible than capable. You see the difference? That being exact is the goal rather than simply being precise. What are you doing to improve the soul of your business, and where does it manifest? And trust me, it manifests at every point that someone else can look at you. And that becomes a reflection of your brand. It becomes a reflection of your business, and it carries with you. And I can walk through your loading dock, your front door, your backstage, look at your truck pack, look at your proposal, and tell so many things about your business, some of which are not going to make you happy, some of which will. Can you make more of the things that are going to please and excite the people around you, make them want to do business with you, rather than they take a look at you and automatically pigeonhole you into an archetype? Okay. Do you have a soul, or are you an archetype? And what can you do about it? Trust me, it is worth doing about it. I don't care how large or small you are. Choose. If you choose not to decide what your soul is going to be, okay, you've made a choice. And the choice may be that all you've got is a look and not a lot of substance behind it. And is that why you got into this? Is that why you chose this? So there you go. I struggle with pottery because I like to be precise. I like things to be exact. But as my instructor often reminded me when I first started, if you want perfect, go to Pottery Barn, and they will sell you a perfect piece of pottery that was made by a machine. Okay. Your pottery is going to have a soul, which means there's probably going to be a fingerprint on it somewhere. And that's going to mean something exciting to somebody else that holds it. So put your fingerprints on a few things. Thanks for listening. Find some art in your life. Talk to you next week.
If you liked this episode of the Intentional Success Podcast, please leave a review and don't forget to like and subscribe. This podcast has been brought to you by the helpful folks at Mertz Crew.